What would you do if the HOA called 911 on you for standing at the gate to your own lake? I bought a lake for peace. But the HOA welded a gate, called 911, and claimed the water as theirs. Nobody expected a forgotten 1954 document to flip everything on its head. And the moment I stepped toward that gate, they had no idea the water law was about to side with me, not with them. The first thing Remy saw was steel where there should have been sky. He eased his old silver pickup to a stop on the gravel shoulder, tires crunching over sun-baked rock, and stared at the wall of metal that now sliced across the lane. Yesterday, this road had ended in weathered posts and a faded lake access sign. Today, a brand new gate stretched from fence line to fence line, black powder coat gleaming in the harsh mountain sun like a bruise. Beyond it, the lake burned turquoise in the morning light. Jet skis carved bright white scars across the water. A couple of small yachts bobbed lazily near the dock. Cabins dotted the far shoreline like wooden matchboxes pressed into the pines, and snow-dusted peaks sat behind everything like a painted backdrop. It should have been peaceful. Instead, there was a woman in a bright pink suit standing dead center in front of the gate, and she looked like war. She planted herself with both heels dug into the asphalt, silver hair sprayed into an immaculate shell that didn't dare move in the breeze. The suit was too sharp for a lakeside road, hot pink blazer, pencil skirt, diamond brooch blazing at the lapel, and in her right hand she held a shiny white megaphone like it was a weapon. As Remy's truck rolled to a full stop, she lifted it to her mouth. "There he is!" Her voice exploded through the quiet, metallic and shrill. "That's him, officers! That's the man I told you about! He's been trespassing on HOA lake property and threatening my staff." Remy's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. He'd never seen this woman in his life. The heat was already rising off the road in wavy mirages. Pine resin and dust mixed with the faint chemical tang of boat fuel drifting up from the water. And behind the woman in pink, 3 white SUVs idled in a line. 2 marked sheriff's units with light bars, 1 black Tahoe with the HOA logo, a stylized pine tree over blue waves on the door. Red and blue strobes flashed against the gate's bars. Gravel popped under boots as uniformed deputies stepped out, hands resting close to their holsters. "Go ahead and shut it off, sir," one of them called. "Hands where we can see them." Remy killed the engine. The familiar clatter of the old diesel died away, leaving only the distant buzz of jet skis and the megaphone's feedback whine. He rolled down both windows, lifted his hands to the top of the steering wheel, and drew a slow breath. "You've seen worse than this," he reminded himself. Floodgates blowing out in the middle of the night. Contractors lying through their teeth in boardrooms. This is just a gate and a woman with a microphone. The pink suit marched closer, heels ticking angrily against the pavement as she kept the megaphone up. "My name is Bethany Reed," she announced, as if he'd asked. "I am the president of the Clearwater Bluffs Homeowners Association, and I am invoking our right to protect community property from criminal misuse. He has no right to be here. This is a private marina, restricted to HOA residents." She jabbed a finger toward him with the kind of force most people reserved for pointing at wild animals. "He doesn't even live inside the gate." A small crowd had gathered along the side of the road. HOA residents, from the look of them. Matching golf caps, athleisure, sunglasses, phones held up in almost perfect unison. Tiny black rectangles capturing every angle of the spectacle. Remy could feel their eyes crawling over his truck. The dusty work boots on his feet. The rolled-up sleeves of his faded blue shirt. The worn ball cap with his old engineering firm's logo. To them, he knew exactly what he looked like. Some ranch guy, some outsider, too rough around the edges for their curated lakeside postcard. The nearest deputy approached, a tall man in tan with mirrored sunglasses and a sun-creased jaw. His name badge read M. Riley. As he walked up, Remy noticed a familiar sheriff's SUV parked slightly back, behind the others. Its driver door hung open, and Sheriff Jake Mercer himself stood by it, arms folded, watching. That made something low in Remy's chest unknot just a little. Jake was Pine Ridge born and raised. Fair, if nothing else. "Morning, sir," Deputy Riley said when he reached the window. His tone was professional but tight. "I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle, okay?" "Deputy?" Bethany's amplified voice slammed into both of them. "You already have my statement." He was warned, several times. The board voted last week to close this road. This man is refusing to comply. He keeps insisting that his marina rights trump community safety. She put air quotes around his marina rights, lips curling like the words tasted bad. Remy turned his head slowly, meeting her gaze over the raised megaphone. Up close, he could see the faint tremor in her jawline. She was enjoying this, he realized. Maybe a little too much. He unbuckled his seatbelt, movements deliberate, and swung his boots down onto the gravel. The sun hit him full in the face as he stepped out, warm and too bright. Dust puffed up around his soles and drifted away on the breeze. "I didn't refuse anything," he said, keeping his voice calm. "I got a letter, sure, saying this road was reclassified as HOA maintenance only. It didn't say you were welding a gate across a recorded easement." A murmur rolled through the watching crowd. Marcus Hale, standing near the back in his old camo jacket and ball cap, caught Remy's eye. Marcus gave the slightest shake of his head, as if to say, "Careful." Deputy Riley positioned himself between Remy and the gate, one hand out, the other still resting near his sidearm. "Sir, I'm just here because we got a call about a potential disturbance," Riley said. "I need you to step away from the gate and keep some space between you and Mrs. Reed." Behind him, Bethany's knuckles whitened around the megaphone handle. "Arrest him," she snapped. "He's been warned. We posted notice on the road. This is cut and dry trespassing. The community owns this marina now. We took it over after the last owner died and abandoned it. He's got no claim." Remy felt the first flare of real anger catch at the edge of his ribs, a hot, insistent ember. He tamped it down. "Deputy," he said quietly, keeping his eyes on Riley but angling his voice so it carried to the sheriff too. "Before anybody reaches for a pair of cuffs, I'd really appreciate it if you'd check something for me." "What's that?" "State Water Authority records." Remy jerked his chin toward the lake. Specifically, the Clearwater Transit and Access Corridor file, and the marina easement attached to Parcel 17B. That's my parcel. There was a second of silence. Bethany let out a barking laugh. "Oh, this is rich," she said, voice shrieking through the speaker. "He's throwing around big words again. Corridor. Parcel. This man thinks reading some old deed he found in a dusty box makes him a lawyer." A few of the phone holders snickered. Someone in a sleeveless polo muttered, "Just tow the truck," under their breath. Riley glanced back at Jake. The sheriff flicked his gaze from Bethany to Remy and back again, weighing something. "Look," Remy continued, feeling the sun beat down on the back of his neck. Sweat trickled along his spine. "This gate is welded into posts that sit exactly on a recorded easement line that's older than this subdivision. That easement doesn't belong to the HOA. It's tied to my lakeside ranch. I've got the signed dockline contract with the county and the old Waterway agreement sitting in my glove box." He nodded toward his truck. "And if I'm right about what I think this lake used to be used for," he added, "then the state has something to say about anybody putting a big steel choke point across access, HOA or not." The air changed when he said it. It was subtle, but he felt it. The wind coming off the water cooled just a little, whipping the smell of boat exhaust and pine needles across the road. One of the younger deputies shifted his weight. A couple of phones lowered a fraction of an inch. Jake pushed off his SUV and walked closer, boots crunching on gravel. "Mrs. Reed," he said, not bothering with the megaphone. His voice carried just fine. "When did the HOA install this gate?" Last week, she replied quickly. Everything was approved. Liability issues, Sheriff. We have jet skis, children, expensive equipment down there. We can't have random ranchers driving in whenever they feel like it. Her eyes flicked over Remy as if the word rancher was a diagnosis. And did you file anything with the county about closing this access? Jake asked. Change in status? Public right-of-way? Anything like that? Bethany's smile went brittle. We discussed it with legal counsel, she said. And we posted signage. That's all that was required. Our bylaws are very clear. Remy forced himself not to interrupt. Let her talk. She's digging. Jake turned back to him. You got that paperwork you mentioned, Remy? In the glove box, Remy said, and on my phone. I can show you the parcel map right now, if you'll let me reach in my pocket without anyone putting a knee in my back. That got a faint snort from Marcus in the crowd. Even a couple of the residents looked uncomfortable. Deputy Riley's jaw worked. Slowly, he said. 2 fingers. You reach for anything other than your phone. This goes a different way. Clear? Crystal, Remy said. He moved carefully, 2 fingers slipping into his front pocket, drawing out his phone, the screen already smudged with dust and fingerprints. A few swipes, and the familiar county GIS app opened. Colored parcel lines overlaid satellite imagery of the lake, the road, the strip of land leading down to the dock. He held the phone out, screen toward Riley. The deputy stepped closer. Zoomed in right there, Remy said, pointing with a knuckle. 17B. See the little blue line running from my ranch boundary, across this road, down to that dock? That's the marina easement. Been on record since the 50s. Whoever built this gate planted it right on top of that. Riley's brows drew together behind the mirrored lenses. Jake took the phone from him, studying the screen. Bethany shifted, megaphone squealing. This is absurd, she said. Sheriff, you can't seriously be entertaining this. The board voted. We have minutes. We have signatures. We have a duty to protect our investment. Remy let his gaze slide past the gate, down toward the water. From this angle, he could just make out the old wooden pilings of the original dock, still jutting up beside the shiny new aluminum platforms the HOA had installed. The evening he first walked that shoreline flashed across his mind. Boots in damp sand, the quiet suck of the lake at the banks, his flashlight beam catching rusted bolts, and a little brass plate with a year stamped on it. 1954. He brought his eyes back to Jake. Sheriff, he said, all I'm asking is this. Before anyone calls me a criminal in their report, before anybody puts cuffs on me in front of half the neighborhood and every smartphone on this road, please, just call the State Water Authority. Ask them about the Clearwater Transit and Access Corridor. Ask them if a homeowner association can throw a padlock across it because they're worried about aesthetic standards. The megaphone crackled as Bethany jerked it back up. He's stalling, she cried. He said the same nonsense at our board meeting. This is harassment. This is intimidation. You have the right to remove him. Use it. Remy could hear his heart now, steady and too loud in his ears. The world felt narrowed, down to sun glare off steel bars, the smell of hot dust, the weight of a dozen cell phone lenses pointed at his face. Jake looked from the phone to the gate, to Bethany, and then finally back to Remy. His eyes were cool, assessing. Deputy, he said softly to Riley, handing back the phone. Keep everyone where they are for a minute. Then he reached for the radio at his shoulder. This is Sheriff Mercer, he said into the mic, eyes never leaving the gate. Patch me through to State Water Authority, Basin Office. I've got a question about an old corridor designation, and whether we just got called to the wrong side of a trespassing complaint. Bethany's smile faltered, just a fraction. The crowd shifted. The jet skis down on the lake kept circling, their distant engines whining, oblivious. Remy stood there in the heat and dust, hands still visible, wondering how exactly a man who'd bought a lake could end up here, treated like an intruder at the only gate that was supposed to lead to his own water. Jake's radio crackled sharply, slicing through the stale, tense air. As the sheriff stepped back toward his SUV to take the call, the crowd's attention sagged just enough for Remy to feel a thin thread of breath return to his lungs. But the moment wasn't relief. Not even close. It was something quieter. A kind of slow, heavy ache that pulsed up from somewhere deep inside him. He let his eyes drift past the gate again, past the pines shimmering in the morning haze, past the gleaming water he'd hoped would heal something inside him. And before he could stop it, memory pulled him backward. 2 years earlier, the air had smelled very different, like concrete dust and steel and river mud. He'd been standing in a cavernous underground room beneath a half-built flood control structure, clipboard in hand, staring at a line of figures that didn't add up. Pressure differentials wrong, stress tolerances shaved too close, reinforcement steel that hadn't matched the order. He'd known, even then, that speaking up would cost him more than a promotion or a good recommendation. But he'd spoken anyway. Turned out the people signing off on those numbers, the people getting huge bonuses, didn't appreciate being challenged by a damn engineer who still showed up to work with mud on his boots. The investigation dragged on for months. Accusations flew. His contractor friends stopped returning calls. And one morning, sitting in his truck outside the project office, Remy finally realized he wasn't angry anymore. Just tired. Bone tired. Worn down by years of fighting for the bare minimum of safety in an industry that had forgotten why safety mattered. He resigned before the sun set that day. He sold his townhome a month later. And by winter, he found himself scrolling through listings for places so quiet the world couldn't find him even if it tried. Ranches, abandoned river parcels, old cabins near forgotten reservoirs. Then he saw the photo. A lake, glinting like turquoise glass, pines bending toward the waterline, and a note buried midway through the listing. Property includes full water rights and recorded marina easement, dating back to 1954. He hadn't meant to fall in love with a piece of land, but something in that single sentence tugged at him. Something old, something sturdy. Water rights weren't just property. They were history, responsibility, control. After years of losing battles he should have won, the idea of a place where the rules were clear, written long before he arrived, felt like something he could trust. He drove up to the mountain valley the next morning, long before the realtor's office even opened. The gravel road had been empty except for a few deer nibbling at the brush near the tree line. The lake had been quiet then. No boats, no shouting kids, no jet skis carving foam into the surface. Only wind touching water. Only pine shadows stretching across the sand. As he stepped out of his truck for the first time, the wooden dock, old and crooked, missing boards, creaked under his boots. A faded brass plaque, half swallowed by moss, caught the sunlight. Clearwater Transit and Access Corridor. Est 1954 authorized dock line. He'd crouched down to run a thumb across the plate. Even worn, the lettering felt bold, permanent, like a promise hammered into metal. Behind him, someone had cleared their throat. "You must be the engineer." The voice belonged to Marcus Hale, though Remy didn't know his name yet. A wiry man in his 60s with stitched patches on his flannel coat and hands that looked like they'd known ropes and oars for decades. "You can tell?" Remy asked, standing. Marcus shrugged. "Only engineers crouch down to squint at things most folks step over." Then he nodded toward the lake. "You buying it?" "Thinking about it." "Well, I'll tell you straight," Marcus said. "HOA up the ridge pretends this lake is their backyard pool. Been getting a little possessive, especially since old man DeVere passed." "DeVere?" "The previous owner. Didn't use the place much after his wife died. Kind man. Didn't let the HOA touch the shoreline, though. Told him the lake wasn't theirs to manicure. Remy frowned. And after he died? Board got creative, Marcus said. Started calling themselves lake managers. Put out pamphlets. Started hosting fireworks from the marina. Folks didn't know enough to question it. But they didn't own it. Nope, Marcus spat in the sand. Never stopped him before. At the time, Remy had assumed Marcus was exaggerating. Every community had a few loud voices who didn't understand property law. It didn't matter, he told himself. He had the easement in writing. He had the rights. When the ink dried on the deed, the land, and everything tied to it, would be his. He signed the purchase documents 3 days later. And for a while, everything was exactly as he imagined. Mornings on the dock with a thermos of coffee. The crisp, metallic whine of fishing line zipping through air. Sunlight cutting across the surface of the water like a path he could follow straight into the quiet. No traffic, no meetings, no alarms. Only the rhythmic lap of water against the aging wood planks. But peace never stays where HOA politics creep in. It began with a simple sign hammered into the roadside. Temporary redirection, HOA lake maintenance. Then came the emails from the HOA, emails he never signed up for. Notice: Clearwater Bluffs community upgrades. Marina expansion initiative access limited to residents. Then came a morning when he found construction tape wound around the old dock he'd been using, and fresh tire tracks leading from the HOA community down to the waterline. Jet ski wakes were already slicing through the still surface by the time he reached the shore. But the gate, the welded barrier he stood before now, with law enforcement hovering like vultures, was the first real sign that the HOA wasn't playing pretend. They were taking. They were claiming. They were rewriting the rules. And suddenly, Remy wasn't in the quiet lakeside refuge he thought he'd bought. He was back in the same kind of fight he'd tried to escape. The kind where power hides behind titles, loud voices justify bad decisions, and truth is treated like an inconvenience. A gust of wind snapped him back to the present, kicking dust into his boots. Deputy Riley was still watching him closely, thumb tapping nervously against his radio mic. Bethany stood rigid, as if holding herself upright by sheer will. Her pink suit glared against the sunlight like a flare. Down by the water, a little girl on a jet ski let out a whoop of laughter as she carved a tight turn. The noise drifted up the hill, bright and careless, completely out of step with the tension strung across the gate. Remy swallowed against the dryness in his throat. This wasn't the life he'd chosen, but it was the fight that had chosen him. And as he looked at the metal gate gleaming under the sun, sitting exactly where the 1954 corridor line ran, he knew there was no backing away. Not now, not ever. Because he hadn't just bought a ranch. He'd bought a promise. The afternoon the deputies finally released him from the roadside standoff, Remy didn't go straight home. He drove down to the far end of the lake, the side no one monitored, where the county road bent away and the pines grew thick and shadowed. The lake stretched out like glass, the late light sliding across the water in long strips of silver and aqua. Even here, though, the noise of engines carried faintly across the surface. Someone's jet ski revved, echoing off the hills like a taunt. Remy parked beneath a stand of tall ponderosas and stepped out into the sharp scent of dried pine needles and hot resin. A dragonfly skimmed low over the water, wings flickering cobalt in the fading sun. For a moment, he let the quiet soak into him. Let it calm the pulse that still hammered in his neck from the confrontation at the gate. Then he walked. A faint path followed the shoreline, worn by decades of bare feet and fishing boots. He moved slowly, scanning the waterline, the slopes, the shadows. He wasn't sure what he hoped to find, only that the gate didn't make sense. HOA boards didn't weld steel barriers overnight unless they believed the land was theirs, or they needed people to believe it. 10 minutes along the shore, the trees thinned, opening onto a wide cove. And there it was. The marina. A sprawling, gleaming structure that looked like it had been pulled from a vacation brochure. Rows of aluminum docks, floating slips with fresh blue bumpers, bright red rails for jet skis, a rental kiosk with a painted sign reading, "Clearwater Bluffs Water Sports. Residents only." Remy froze. This wasn't maintenance. This wasn't even community access. This was an operation. A full-fledged, revenue-generating marina sitting on a lake the HOA did not own. Down near the docks, a teenager wearing a reflective vest was stacking life jackets. A man in a red polo shirt, maybe a supervisor, stood beside a jet ski rack, clipboard in hand, calling out numbers. On the far dock, a young couple posed for a photo in front of a pontoon boat, the woman tossing her hair back in practiced, carefree laughter. There were signs posted everywhere. Fees, hours, rental conditions, HOA pass required, non-residents prohibited. Remy's jaw tightened as he stepped forward, staying just inside the shade of the trees. From here he could see the glossy construction tags still bolted onto parts of the dock, fresh, bright, unweathered. The whole setup couldn't have been more than a couple of years old. "Unbelievable," he muttered. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and began recording. He filmed the docks, the rails, the workers, the rental kiosk, the pricing sign listing jet ski rentals at $60 an hour. He zoomed in on the laminated rule sheet that said, "Property of Clearwater Bluffs HOA." And then he caught something else. A tall, narrow sign near the water's edge that read, "Marina reopened after major improvements funded by resident. Fees, thank you for supporting our community. Resident fees." He felt heat crawl up the back of his neck. Marcus had mentioned rumors of special assessments, but seeing the polished infrastructure laid out before him, it was impossible to believe those fees were being used responsibly or legally. A soft crunch sounded behind him. He turned, expecting a deputy or maybe a marina worker. Instead, Marcus Hale stepped out from between two pines, hands stuffed into his jacket pockets, face unreadable beneath the brim of his cap. "Figured I'd find you here," Marcus said. "Been a big topic of conversation lately." "You knew about all this?" Remy asked, gesturing toward the marina. "Knew they were expanding. Didn't know they went this far." Marcus stepped closer, squinting out at the docks. "About a year ago, Bethany said the HOA was taking over lake safety. Month later, this popped up. Folks thought it was nice, convenient. Didn't question the details. Didn't question who actually owned the lake." Marcus chuckled without humor. "Folks here don't question much when it comes packaged in a newsletter with cursive headers and pastel borders." A gust of wind rolled across the cove, carrying the scent of sunscreen and gasoline, rippling the lake in overlapping rings. Remy felt a deep heaviness settle over him. This wasn't negligence. It was entitlement. And something dangerous always followed entitlement. Justifying, expanding, taking. "How long has the HOA been collecting money for this?" he asked. Marcus rubbed the back of his neck. 3 years now, I think. Special assessment that started at $20 a month. Last I heard, it's up to $50. "And the improvements match that?" Remy asked. Marcus snorted. "Does anything the HOA do ever match the fees they charge?" People laughed when they said things like that in small towns. But here, with the sun catching the edges of the unpermitted rails and the red polo supervisor shouting orders like he ran the place, the joke didn't feel funny. Remy walked a few steps down the shoreline until he found a clearing with a higher vantage point. From there, he could see the whole layout, the docks branching out like silver fingers, the jet skis lined in neat rows, the pontoon boat cruising in, the tiny crowd of residents lounging on the rental deck chairs like it was a private resort. all built on a lake the HOA didn't own, all funded by residents who believed they were supporting community upkeep, all blocking the access guaranteed by that brass plaque from 1954. A sharp beep cut through the evening air. The man in the red polo tapped his watch and called out, "Last rentals in 10 minutes. Jet skis coming in." Several teenagers revved their engines and carved one last loop before gliding toward the docks, the wakes trailing them shimmering behind. Remy lifted his phone again, capturing every angle, license numbers, signage, even audio snippets of the supervisor shouting instructions. He zoomed in on a row of documents pinned behind the rental counter, liability waivers, rules, and what looked like a printed spreadsheet. "Marcus," he said quietly, "has anyone ever asked where the money goes?" "Some have tried." Marcus rubbed his jaw. "They get told it's board confidential. They don't push after that. Nobody wants to be the guy who gets the HOA newsletter calling them a troublemaker." Remy lowered the phone. The sun dipped lower, lighting the lake with warm gold. For a moment, the scene looked almost idyllic. Families laughing, water sparkling, shadows lengthening across the valley. But the beauty hid rot. And the longer he stared at the marina, the more he felt the old familiar feeling rise in his chest. The same one that pulled him into those underground dam chambers years ago, flashlight trembling in one hand. Knowing something wasn't right, but knowing he had to be the one to face it. He drew a breath. Tomorrow, he told himself, he'd confront the HOA board directly. No deputies, no megaphones, no theatrics, just facts, maps, laws, the truth. He turned back toward his truck, boots crunching over pine needles, the cove falling quiet behind him as the day dimmed. But as he left the shoreline, a final question pressed hard against his mind. If the HOA was bold enough to build a marina they didn't own, what else were they bold enough to do? The sky was bruising purple by the time Remy reached his ranch house, a low, weathered cabin tucked against a slope of pines, its porch light flickering like an exhausted lantern. He pushed through the screen door and let the familiar scent of old cedar, dust, and coffee grounds greet him. It was the kind of smell he'd grown to rely on, steady and unchanging, even when everything around him threatened to shift beneath his feet. He dropped his keys on the counter, then walked straight to the small wooden table in the corner, the table he jokingly called the war room. It held the binder from the property sale, a stack of maps older than the interstate, and thick folders he'd pulled from county archives during the purchase process. Until now, they'd been reassurance. Tonight, they felt like weapons. He flicked on the old desk lamp. Its warm glow spread over the table. There they were, the survey maps, parcel outlines in pale blues and greens, the easement corridor drawn in a thin red strip leading straight from his land to the lake. He spread them out, smoothing the curled edges. On top of those, he set the deed, the title insurance packet, and the marina access agreement he'd barely skimmed months ago. Then, slowly, he reached for the folder marked Historical, County Records, 1950. His thumb brushed dust from the cover. "Let's see what you're hiding," he murmured. He pulled out the yellowed documents one by one. Old correspondence, hand-drawn shoreline sketches, typed memos from decades before he was born. Then something metal clinked faintly at the bottom of the folder, a small brass corner fastener on a folded sheet. When he lifted it, the paper nearly fell apart in his hands. The edges were brittle, the ink faded, but he could still make out the bold heading. Clearwater Waterway Transportation Agreement, 1954, State of Montana. His pulse quickened. There was the seal, the official signatures, the state engineer's stamp from a different era. He unfolded the document carefully, pressing its creases flat. A line near the center caught his eye. "This waterway, designated for transit and access, shall remain free of obstruction. No private entity shall impede the legal use of the corridor by authorized owners or designated public offices. He read the sentence twice, then a third time. A slow, steady exhale left his lungs. The easement wasn't just a property perk. It wasn't just a convenience. It was protected. State recognized. Locked in place by a legal designation no homeowners association could overwrite. Not with meetings, not with newsletters, not even with a steel gate welded into the ground. He scanned further. Access gates, if installed, shall remain operable for authorized parties at all times and shall not be locked, blocked, or altered in a manner that denies legal passage. He sat back in his chair, stunned by the clarity, by how absolute the language was. If this document held up, and there was no reason it wouldn't, Bethany had done far more than inconvenience him. She had broken state waterway law. A soft rumble of thunder rolled somewhere deep in the mountains, vibrating faintly through the window pane. Remy couldn't tell if it was actual thunder or something inside him finally shifting, anger turning into resolve. He didn't wait. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a number he hadn't used in years. Sarah Mitchell, water rights attorney. Brilliant. Sharp. The kind of lawyer who made state officials straighten their jackets before speaking. They'd met on a river restoration project back when Remy was still in engineering. She'd once joked that she could win a water dispute blindfolded with one hand tied behind her back. He dialed. The phone rang twice. Remy? Her voice carried the same crisp steadiness he remembered. Haven't heard from you since you ran off to the mountains. Everything okay? Not exactly, he said. I need your eyes on something. Something significant. Significant how? The HOA here welded a steel gate across my easement. They're running a full marina operation on the lake. Rentals, docks, the works. And I just found a state waterway agreement from 1954 that says the corridor can't legally be blocked. Silence, then the soft sound of her chair creaking. Send it, she said at last. He snapped photos of each brittle page and texted them. While he waited for her to read, he stared at the cabin window. The lake shimmered faintly in the distance, reflecting the first hints of nightfall. Sarah called back almost immediately. Oh, Remy, she said, voice pitched low with disbelief. This isn't just significant. This is a problem for them. A big one. How big? Bethany blocked a state-protected waterway. That gate alone could get her fined. The marina? If they're collecting money without authorization on a corridor zoned for transit and public access, that's illegal, Remy finished. Not just illegal, potentially fraudulent. And if the HOA accepted payments from residents to maintain this marina, Remy, this could spiral into state-level violations, maybe even misappropriation. He rubbed a hand across his face. So the law's on my side. More than you realize. But don't confront them with this yet. I was planning to talk to the board tomorrow. Talk, yes, she said. Reveal everything. No, you don't show your strongest card first, Remy, especially when the other side has built something this elaborate. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Still practicing your poker metaphors, I see. They're effective. And listen, send me photos of the marina. Every dock, rail, sign, receipt, whatever you have. I'll cross-check the construction permits with the state. He looked at the stack of images on his phone, the ones he'd recorded earlier from the tree line. Already done? Good. I'll call you in the morning. Tonight, Remy, don't engage them. Let them think you're rattled. People who feel untouchable tend to make mistakes. He nodded even though she couldn't see him. Thanks, Sarah. Don't thank me yet, she said quietly. This fight's just starting. When he hung up, the cabin felt colder. The old floorboards creaked under him as he stood. Outside, the lake was now a sheet of deep blue, reflecting the faint starlight. A few distant splashes echoed, fish jumping, unaware of the war brewing along their shores. Remy folded the 1954 document carefully and slid it back into its folder. Then he placed the folder on top of the pile, where it sat like a verdict. He turned off the lamp. He should have gone to bed. Instead, he stood at the window a long while, watching the dark silhouette of the HOA's gate far across the valley. Watching the road that would lead him straight to tomorrow's board meeting. Watching the path that was already unfolding beneath him. One he hadn't chosen, but one he now understood he was meant to walk. Because sometimes a lake wasn't just water. Sometimes it was a line in the sand. Remy folded the 1954 document carefully and slid it back into its folder. Then he placed the folder on top of the pile, where it sat like a verdict. He turned off the lamp. He should have gone to bed. Instead, he stood at the window a long while, watching the dark silhouette of the HOA's gate far across the valley. Watching the road that would lead him straight to tomorrow's board meeting. Watching the path that was already unfolding beneath him. One he hadn't chosen, but one he now understood he was meant to walk. Because sometimes a lake wasn't just water. Sometimes it was a line in the sand. By late the next morning, clouds were beginning to bunch along the ridgeline. Thin, bright at the edges, like someone had taken a knife and scraped light across the sky. Remy's boots thudded against the wooden steps of the Clearwater Bluffs Community Lodge as he climbed them. The building was oversized and over-varnished, the kind of place designed more for showings than community gatherings. Large stone columns framed the entrance, and behind the tinted glass windows, silhouettes moved like shadows pacing inside a cage. He opened the door and stepped into a thick wall of murmured chatter. The lobby buzzed with tension. Residents clustered in small knots, pressed close, whispering. Every second person seemed to be holding a printout from the HOA newsletter, as if it were scripture. Others carried coffee cups and folded arms, eyes narrowed, scanning the room. Across the far end, a row of metal folding chairs faced a long wooden table. Behind that table sat the board. Bethany Reed occupied the center seat, wrapped in another bright pink suit. This one more severe, double-breasted, with pointed shoulders that made her look larger than life. Her hair was curled tighter today, helmet-like. A stack of papers was arranged in front of her in perfect fanned alignment. Her eyes found Remy immediately. A thin smile slid across her lips. "Well," she said, loud enough that several heads turned. "The gentleman of the hour." Remy kept walking. A couple of residents pulled their phones out, not to record but to scroll through old emails trying to remember whether they'd ever heard mention of a marina takeover. He reached the front row and stood with the folder tucked under his arm. "Let's begin," Bethany said, tapping her gavel lightly. "This emergency meeting is to address a situation that threatens community order. A situation involving unauthorized presence on HOA property." She sat taller, shoulders rigid, authority radiating from every angle. "Specifically," she continued, "the repeated intrusion by Mr. Remy Cole onto our private marina." Murmurs rippled across the seating area. A couple nodded. A few looked unsure. Remy waited for her to finish. "Would you like to make a statement, Mr. Cole?" Bethany asked, though her tone made clear the invitation was merely protocol. "Yes," Remy said. He stepped forward and set the folder on the table, not slamming it, just placing it with careful intention. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he began. "This marina isn't HOA property. The lake isn't HOA property. And the gate you welded across the access road," Bethany cut him off with a sharp, metallic laugh. "Oh, here we go again." She waved a dismissive hand. "Your conspiracy theories about old paperwork? We've heard all this. None of it applies anymore. The HOA reclaimed the lake through—" "That's enough." The voice came from the back. Heads turned. Marcus Hale stepped into view, arms folded, jaw tight. He walked down the aisle to stand beside Remy. His boots echoed across the polished floor. You never reclaimed anything, Marcus said. You just started acting like you did. Bethany stiffened. Mr. Hale, you do not have the floor. Never stopped you from talking over the rest of us in every meeting, Marcus replied. A few people chuckled nervously. Remy opened the folder. Here's what matters. He lifted the deed first. I legally own parcel 17B, including full water rights. He set it down. Next, the marina easement agreement. This grants access directly to the dock line. Another paper down. Finally, he pulled out the yellowed set of pages that had nearly fallen apart in his hands the night before. And this, he said, voice steady, is the Clearwater Waterway Transportation Agreement of 1954. It legally protects the access corridor that runs through the area where you welded your gate. That corridor predates the Clearwater Bluffs HOA by over 50 years. A collective murmur swept through the lodge. Some faces changed, subtle shifts from confusion to doubt, from confidence to something more fragile. Bethany's jaw tightened. This is meaningless, she snapped. Completely irrelevant. Our bylaws supersede. Bylaws don't supersede state law, Remy said quietly. Someone near the middle row whispered, He's got a point. Another chimed in. Why were we paying all those fees then? For the first time, Bethany's practiced composure flickered. The fees, she said, raising her chin, went toward community improvements and maintenance. We upgraded the marina to provide a safe, attractive amenity for our residents. Remy clicked a small remote he'd brought, projecting an image onto the lodge's wall-mounted screen. A drone photo of the marina appeared, clear, crisp, revealing every dock, every slip, every rail. And yet, he said, none of this has a single construction permit on file with the county or the state. I checked. Gasps fluttered through the crowd. Bethany sputtered. That can't be correct. Our treasurer handled. The man sitting 2 chairs to her left, a balding board member with glasses, shifted uncomfortably. I've never seen those permits, he said under his breath. Remy didn't press him, the Hong. Admission had already landed. Residents have been paying special assessments for 3 years, Remy continued. But there's no transparency, no documented expenditure, no accounting report released to the community. An older woman rose shakily from the 3rd row. Her voice trembled as she spoke. I asked about the finances last year. Bethany told me it was confidential, said I didn't need to worry about it. Another resident chimed in. Same here. She shut me down in front of the board. A line of tension snapped inside the room. Bethany banged her gavel. Enough! You people have no idea how much work goes into running a community. I have carried this HOA for years. I have protected your property values, and now you're siding with an outsider? Remy held her gaze. I'm not your enemy. The truth is. He reached for the projector remote again, but before he could press anything, Bethany lunged forward and snatched it out of his hand. This meeting is over, she shouted. The gavel slammed down so hard it bounced. She stood, trembling with anger, pink suit blazing under the fluorescent lights. If you step near that marina gate again, she hissed, I will call 911, and next time, the sheriff won't go easy on you. The room exploded, not into applause but into arguments. Residents shouting, others demanding records, a few walking out. A man in the back muttering that he wanted his assessment money refunded. Bethany stormed out the side door, heels striking so loudly they echoed after she was gone. Marcus turned to Remy. Well, he said dryly, I think you rattled the hornet's nest. Remy exhaled. She made the threat. Marcus nodded slowly. And I expect she'll follow through. Be ready. Remy gathered his papers. Tomorrow, he knew, the fight would escalate. He just hadn't expected how fast the escalation would come, or how many sirens would be involved. The following morning broke bright and sharp. the kind of mountain light that made every pine needle glint like glass. Yet something in the air felt heavy, unsettled, like the valley was holding its breath. Remy drove down the winding gravel road, his truck bouncing along familiar ruts, dust curling behind him in a soft tan plume. As he neared the lakeside entrance, he saw movement, too much movement for this early hour. A cluster of people lined the shoulder. Residents in sunglasses and fleece jackets, HOA volunteers in matching blue polos, kids with scooters and phones held high. And at the center of everything stood the gate again. Except now, a pair of HOA security guards in neon yellow vests flanked it like ceremonial pillars. And right in front of them, framed by sunlight like some kind of theatrical spotlight, stood Bethany Reed. The bright pink suit was back. Today, she paired it with pearl earrings and a white binder tucked under her arm. Her hair was wound so tightly it looked like it might crack. She turned the moment she heard Remy's truck approach. "There he is!" she yelled, lifting her megaphone with the precision of someone unholstering a holstered weapon. "Document this! All of you, record!" Phones tilted toward him like a battery of staring eyes. Remy put the truck in park and stepped out slowly. The morning breeze off the lake was cool, carrying the faint scent of wet wood and engine fuel. Waves lapped softly against the pilings down below, nature's quiet contradiction to the chaos building on the road. He didn't say anything. Not yet. Bethany marched forward, heels stabbing the asphalt with each step. "Mr. Cole," she barked into the megaphone, even though he was 10 feet away. "As of this morning, the Clearwater Bluffs HOA is escalating enforcement. You were warned not to approach the marina. You chose to ignore that. So today, you will face consequences." "Bethany," Remy said calmly, "I'm walking to my easement. The law—" "No!" she shrieked, the megaphone distorting the sound so harshly it made a child in the crowd flinch. "You have no rights here. This is our marina, our property, our lake." Remy blinked slowly. "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." Before he could respond, she spun toward the security guards. "Call it in." One of the guards tapped a radio clipped to his vest. "Dispatch? This is Clearwater HOA security requesting sheriff response for trespass in progress. Subject is refusing to leave community property." Remy felt something in his chest sink. Not fear, more like resignation. The play was predictable. She wasn't subtle. And the deputies, well, he'd seen how close things came yesterday. Engines growled in the distance. Remy turned to see a sheriff SUV cresting the hill, lights already flashing. Behind it came another one, and another. 3 units. Bethany clasped her hands in a gesture of triumphant piety, as though justice itself had arrived to bless her. The SUVs rolled to a halt, gravel spitting under their tires. Doors opened. Deputies stepped out. Then Sheriff Jake Mercer emerged last, hat low, expression unreadable. "Morning," Jake called, surveying the tense semicircle of residents and the welded steel gate. "We got a report of trespassing." "Yes," Bethany said, thrusting herself forward with a theatrical step. "This man is attempting to force entry into our secured marina. He has been repeatedly notified he is not permitted access." "That's not accurate," Remy said. Jake lifted a hand gently to pause both of them. "Let me get the whole picture." Bethany tapped her binder. "Sheriff, everything is documented. Our votes, our bylaws, our safety assessments. This man has been disruptive, dangerous, and, frankly, unstable in his behaviors. He threatens people. He films children. Remy's brows shot up. "I filmed the marina docks, Bethany, not children." The crowd murmured. Not everyone liked how she phrased that. Bethany snapped the binder shut. "Arrest him." Deputy Riley shifted his stance. "Ma'am, we can't arrest someone unless—" "He's trespassing!" she screamed, her voice cracking. How hard is that to understand? Remy stepped forward one measured pace, raising both hands in a gesture of calm. Sheriff, he said evenly, before anyone makes a mistake, I suggest you contact the State Water Authority again. You're standing in front of a gate welded across a protected corridor. Jake pressed his lips together. Remy, you said that yesterday, but the authority office wasn't able to confirm anything without reviewing documents. I have them, Remy said. Right here. He reached into the folder tucked beneath his arm, and instantly, 2 residents shrieked as if he'd drawn a weapon. He's reaching for something! Officer, watch out! Deputy Riley tensed, hand hovering near his holster. Not drawing, but close. Remy froze, suppressing a wave of frustration. Slowly, painfully slowly, he held the folder up with both hands. It's paper, he said. Just paper, maps, agreements. Jake exhaled, motioning Riley to lower his stance. Bethany stepped forward again. He's manipulating you. Sheriff, you are being manipulated by a clever, scheming outsider who bought some dusty acreage and thinks he owns the world. No, Remy said quietly. Just the portion of it I legally purchased. That ignited something in her. You don't belong here, she screamed. You're not a resident. You don't follow our rules. Jake stepped between them. His voice was calm but firm. Mrs. Reed, please step back. She looked stunned, betrayed even, but she did step back, barely. Remy handed the folder to Jake. Before you listen to anyone's version of events, including mine, please read the designation file. Jake opened the folder. Inside was the deed, the easement, the corridor map, and the 1954 Waterway Transportation Agreement with its state seal gleaming faintly under the morning light. The sheriff flipped through the pages, his jaw tightening a fraction. Behind him, the crowd began whispering. Phones lowered. Doubt crept in like fog off the lake. Bethany watched Jake's expression change and lunged toward him. That paper is irrelevant, she insisted. The HOA supersedes that old nonsense. Jake raised a hand, not to stop Remy but to silence her. Mrs. Reed, he said slowly, I'm not sure you're correct about that. She recoiled, eyes wide. What do you mean? Jake didn't answer immediately. He picked up his radio, clicked the mic. Dispatch, this is Sheriff Mercer. I need an expedited verification from State Water Authority regarding a corridor designation from 1954 Clearwater Lake Basin. Priority. The radio hissed. A voice crackled back. Copy, Sheriff. Stand by. The lake went eerily quiet. Even the jet skis seemed to pause their roaring arcs along the water, their engines softening in the distance. Wind rustled the trees. Dust twirled in little spirals across the road. Bethany's breathing grew shallow. Remy watched her face drain of color as realization, slow, unwilling, but unmistakable, began to seep through her confidence. Because she'd pulled out every weapon she had, the megaphone, the crowd, the binder, the deputies, and still, the truth was heavier than all of it. A long moment passed before the radio crackled again. Sheriff Mercer, State Water Authority confirms the Clearwater Transit Corridor is active and legally protected. No private entity may obstruct access. Do you require statute details? The words snapped through the air like a branch breaking. The crowd gasped. Bethany stepped backward as if struck. Jake lowered the radio slowly. His eyes met Remy's, steady, certain. Mr. Cole, he said, you have lawful access to the marina. Then he turned to Bethany. And this gate needs to be opened, immediately. For a long moment, no one moved. The breeze rustled the pines above them, carrying dust across the road. Even the crowd seemed frozen. Phones half lifted, eyebrows raised, mouths parted in shock. Bethany blinked rapidly, as if trying to wake herself from a nightmare. Sheriff, you can't be serious. Our bylaws don't override state law, Jake said firmly. Unlock it. Her jaw trembled. The pink suit, which had seemed so commanding just minutes earlier, now looked too bright, too stiff, almost theatrical under the harsh mountain sun. She turned toward the security guards as if expecting reinforcement, but both men stared at the ground, shifting uncomfortably. Ma'am? One ventured. Do we have a key? Bethany whirled on him. Of course we have a key. Why wouldn't we have a key? It's our gate. Actually, the other guard said cautiously. The welds. I don't think this one opens, Mrs. Reed. Maintenance team put it in 2 days ago. Said it was permanent access control. A murmur rolled through the crowd like a gust. Jake's expression hardened. Mrs. Reed, he said slowly, did you or did you not install a permanent barrier across a state-protected waterway corridor? Bethany's lips parted, but nothing came out. Remy felt the tension in his shoulders ease, but only slightly. Victories this early were rarely final. Jake turned to Deputy Riley. Get bolt cutters from the truck. Riley nodded and jogged toward the SUV. The moment he moved, the lodge of residents erupted, some in astonished excitement, others in displeasure, many simply unable to believe what they were witnessing. You mean he was right? All this money we paid, was any of it even legal? I knew Bethany was hiding something. Quiet! Bethany screamed, but the megaphone only squealed and fed back, ripping through the moment in a painful metallic shriek. Riley returned with the cutters. He positioned them at the padlock that hung uselessly from the welded gate bracket, more a prop than a real mechanism. The metal creaked, sparks fluttered. Within seconds, the lock snapped like a dried twig. Remy watched the gate swing open just a few inches, enough for dust and pine scent to swirl through the widening crack. A corridor of air flowed toward the lake, as if the valley itself had exhaled. A path restored, a right acknowledged. Bethany stared at the opening as though something sacred had been violated. This is a mistake, she whispered. A huge mistake. Jake faced her squarely. Mrs. Reed, you're welcome to file a grievance with the county or the state, but until then, the gate stays open, and I expect full cooperation with the law. Remy stepped forward, boots crunching softly on gravel. I appreciate it, Sheriff. Jake nodded once. Professional, not friendly. I enforce what's real, Remy. That's all. Then his voice lowered just enough that only Remy could hear. But this isn't over. Not for any of you. He wasn't wrong. Because just then, Remy noticed something he hadn't seen earlier. As the gate cracked open, a line of fresh tire tracks curved down the access road toward the marina. Thick, heavy ones. Construction trucks, maybe. Or ATVs. The dirt was disturbed in odd patches, as if equipment had been dragged or shifted. A faint smell lingered too. Burnt metal, cut wood, something acrid beneath the lake breeze. Someone had been at the marina before sunrise. Someone rushing. Someone afraid of what might be found. Remy's pulse quickened, and he took a step toward the road. Where do you think you're going? Bethany snapped, regaining some of her fire. To my easement, Remy said. Legally. She trembled with anger. You won't find anything down there? That was the wrong thing to say. Jake caught it. His eyes narrowed. Why wouldn't he? Bethany froze again. Remy didn't wait for more. He walked forward, through the partially opened gate, past the gawkers and whispering clusters of residents. His boots hit the packed dirt of the access road with a soft thud. The lake shimmered in the distance, reflecting the brightening sky. Jet skis jerked to slower speeds, their riders watching the commotion with curiosity. Riley stepped beside him. We'll escort, just to keep the peace. Fine by me, Remy said. Behind them, Bethany paced in tight, frantic steps. She clutched her binder as if it might keep her from unraveling. Remy followed the tracks downhill, As he approached the first bend, he noticed sawdust scattered along the ditch, fresh, pale, sharp-smelling. A broken-off section of rail lay thrown into the brush. A mangled boat cleat gleamed in the sun, snapped clean in half. The marina had been tampered with, or dismantled, or both. He stopped. Riley stopped beside him. "What do you think happened here?" "I think," Remy said slowly, "someone knew authorities would be coming soon." He moved forward again until the lake opened into full view, and what he saw turned his stomach cold. 3 jet ski rails were gone. 2 sections of docks were half unbolted, wood splintered around the edges. A toolbox lay abandoned near the waterline, and someone, multiple someones judging by the footprints, had worked fast in the early morning hours, cleaning up, covering tracks, destroying evidence. Remy felt a chill ripple up his arms despite the sun warming the valley. Bethany's voice shrieked from behind them. "You see? Nothing illegal here. Nothing at all." Riley shot her a look over his shoulder. "Ma'am, this looks like fresh dismantling." She hesitated, a tiny flicker of fear crossing her expression. Remy stepped toward the water's edge. A broken post lay on its side, sawdust still clinging around its base. The cut was too clean, too sharp. Not weather, not accident. Someone had come down here with a saw. Someone desperate. Someone panicking. He turned to Riley. "Deputy, this marina is illegal in every way that counts. And now someone's tampering with it before inspections can happen." Riley's jaw clenched. "I'll notify Jake." Then he paused, glancing back up toward the gate where Bethany now stood, twisting the handle of her binder as if she might tear it in half. "You know," Riley muttered, "I've worked here 12 years. Sheriff, too. We've dealt with some messy HOA disputes. But this smells like something bigger." Remy nodded. "It is bigger." He didn't say how he knew. He didn't say who he'd called last night. But Sarah's voice echoed in his mind. If the marina profits touched HOA accounts, this moves beyond board arguments. It becomes fraud. He looked back at the gate. Bethany was pacing, talking rapidly into her phone now. Her eyes darted from the lake to the gate to the crowd. Her composure was breaking, and the cracks were spreading fast. Something seismic had shifted, something irreversible. Remy turned his gaze toward the lake, watching ripples form around the broken pilings. Light shimmered over the water, bright and relentless. The truth was surfacing, and the people who'd built their castle on lies were beginning to drown in it. By late afternoon, the marina had fallen strangely quiet. The jet's skis that had whipped across the water all morning were now tied up haphazardly, several of them crooked or resting against the dock where the rails had been ripped out. A lone pontoon boat rocked against its mooring, ropes creaking in the warm wind like the sighs of something exhausted. Riley excused himself to notify the sheriff of the dismantling. The crowd thinned as news spread in waves, first disbelief, then outrage, then a kind of simmering uncertainty as the implications began to sink in. People drifted toward their homes, muttering to each other behind cupped hands. Even the children seemed reluctant to run or shout. The lake felt different now, heavier somehow, carrying tension along its gently rolling surface. Remy walked the shoreline slowly, documenting everything as he went. The smell of fresh sawdust clung to the air, mingling with gasoline fumes left by the early morning ATVs. He knelt beside a broken dock post, running a thumb across its clean cut, the grain still sharp. Someone had done this recently, and someone had done it fast. He followed a trail of gouged tire marks toward a narrow path that led into the trees. Bits of torn paper, thick, glossy, the kind used for printed financial flyers, were scattered along the dirt, half buried under pine needles. He picked one up, brushing away grit. It was a rental agreement. HOA Water Sports Program. Resident discount. A line was highlighted in neon yellow. All proceeds shall support community improvements. A bitter breath escaped him. The deeper he walked into the shade of the pines, the more evidence he found. Shredded papers, fragments of laminated signs, pieces of painted boards that once listed marina rules. Someone hadn't just tried to dismantle the marina. They'd tried to erase it. Erase every trace of the unauthorized business. Erase the money trail. Erase the paper trail. Erase the truth. But they were too late. Whatever had been cut or smashed or burned this morning still lived in Remy's camera roll and in the eyes of everyone who'd watched the confrontation at the gate. Remy turned back toward the lake. The sun was dipping low now, casting long golden bars across the water. As he stood there, letting the glow warm his face, a soft crunch of footsteps approached from behind. He didn't turn. He recognized that cautious, measured step. "Sarah," he said quietly. "I hoped you'd still be here," her voice answered. He faced her then. Sarah Mitchell looked exactly as he remembered from their river project years ago. Sharp eyes behind frameless glasses, dark hair pulled into a loose knot, and a calm competence that settled the air around her. She wore a slate blue jacket and carried a binder that was noticeably thicker than the one Bethany had stormed around with. "You came fast," Remy said. "You sent me a photo of a welded gate on a protected corridor," she replied dryly. "That usually makes my day move quicker." She stepped beside him, scanning the ripped-out railings, the scattered papers, the gouged earth. "So," she murmured, "they tried to clean house." "Tried," Remy said. "Didn't get far." She crouched to lift another scrap of paper from the dirt. Her brow lifted. "A rental pricing sheet?" "One of many. They didn't want anyone connecting the dots." Sarah straightened and looked at him fully now. "Remy, this isn't just a violation. This is revenue misuse. Depending on how they handled the money, this could become full-blown misappropriation or even fraud. Did they report this income on HOA statements?" "Residents say no one's ever seen a financial report." She blew out a breath. "That's not good for them." Remy gave a small, humorless laugh. The understatement of the year. Sarah opened her binder and laid out a series of printed pages, copies of county permits, or rather, the absence of them. Blank grids where approvals should have been. "The marina doesn't exist in any official system," she said. "The docks weren't permitted. The rails weren't inspected. The rental structure was never authorized. And the kicker?" She tapped a highlighted line on a statute page. "Commercial use of a state-controlled waterway without authorization is a prosecutable offense. If profits were collected, it's not just a civil infraction. It escalates." Remy felt the weight of her words settle into him, like cold water spreading across his ribs. "Is the state going to get involved?" he asked quietly. Sarah closed the binder gently. "They will. They have to. And they'll send inspectors, real ones, who won't be impressed by vinyl signs and jet ski rentals." The two stood in silence for a while. The lake shimmered like molten gold as the sun sank behind the ridge. Distant loons called across the cove, their voices echoing with eerie clarity. Finally, Remy asked, "What happens next?" Sarah's tone softened. "You stay calm, you stay steady, and you don't confront them again tonight. HOA boards under pressure sometimes lash out. Let the law do the heavy lifting." "That's easier said than done." She gave him a small, understanding smile. "I know, but you're not alone in this anymore." A distant ATV engine revved from somewhere deep in the trees. Sarah and Remy both turned instinctively, listening as the sound faded. "Someone's still moving equipment," Sarah murmured, "trying to get ahead of the investigation." They're panicking. Oh, they're past panicking, Sarah said. They're scrambling. Remy watched the last light drain from the lake, turning the surface into a deep, reflective blue. The entire shoreline felt different now, less like a peaceful refuge and more like ground zero of something bigger, something that was only gaining traction. Sarah closed her binder. I'll file the preliminary notice with the state tonight. Inspectors will be here tomorrow morning. Early. Remy nodded. I'll be here. She held his gaze for a long moment. Steady, encouraging, resolute. Get some rest, she said. Tomorrow will be a long day. Remy waited until her car disappeared up the dirt road before he finally let his shoulders sag. The lake was almost black now, save for a sliver of lavender sky reflecting along its center. Crickets had begun their evening chorus. The wind had gone cool. But the quiet wasn't peace. It was the stillness before a storm hits water. Remy gathered the shredded papers, filming each one carefully under the moonlight. Then he walked back up the slope toward his truck, aware with every step that everything was about to change. Because tonight was silence. Tomorrow would be consequences. And morning came quickly, far too quickly. The first rays of sunlight cut across the valley in sharp, clean angles, glinting off the lake until it flashed like blue fire. Birds trilled in the pines. A soft mist curled above the water, drifting like ghost breath between the broken docks. But beneath that calm beauty, something electric stirred in the air. Anticipation, tension, inevitability. By 7:15 a.m., Remy heard the distant crunch of tires on gravel. Not the sound of pickup trucks or HOA volunteers. No, this was heavier. Official. 2 white state vehicles rolled into view, each marked with the unmistakable blue and gold crest of the State Water Authority. A third vehicle followed, legal division judging by the plates. Behind them, a county truck carrying surveying equipment and a portable soil testing kit. Sarah Mitchell stepped out of the lead car. Her expression was composed, but her eyes sharpened when she spotted Remy walking toward the marina. She lifted a hand in greeting. "They're ready," she said. "You?" "As ready as I'll ever be." The inspectors fanned out across the shoreline, 3 in steel-toed boots and reflective vests, 2 carrying clipboards, and 1 man in a crisp button-down who introduced himself simply as Inspector Doyle. Doyle shook Remy's hand with a firm, businesslike grip. "We've reviewed the documents Ms. Mitchell submitted. We'll begin by verifying structural integrity and permit history. If the marina elements were built without authorization, we'll document each violation." "And the business side?" Remy asked carefully. "That depends on findings," Doyle said. "But unauthorized commercial operation on state-controlled water, we take that seriously." Understatement of the year. Within minutes, the inspectors were measuring dock lengths, photographing rail mounts, taking soil samples, and recording GPS coordinates. The sound of metal measuring tapes snapping back into their casings echoed across the water. It didn't take long before an inspector called out, "We've got fresh cuts here, less than 24 hours old." Another added, "Dock joists installed without support certification." A third muttered, "Zero environmental impact filings. Unbelievable." Remy felt no satisfaction, only a heavy ache of validation. He had been right, too right. The sounds of footsteps on gravel drew his attention upward. A crowd was forming again. Residents clustered along the hillside overlooking the marina, whispering in tight bundles. Their faces were pale with concern, curiosity, and something approaching dread. And in the middle of them, walking like a woman approaching a firing squad, was Bethany Reed. Her pink suit looked wrinkled today. Her hair was undone in several places, and she had no megaphone. She stopped at the top of the slope, staring down at the inspectors swarming the marina like worker ants around a fractured hive. Sarah murmured beside, "Remy, here we go." Bethany descended slowly, each step heavier than the last. When she reached the shoreline, Doyle looked up, expression neutral. "Mrs. Reed, I assume?" "Yes," Bethany said, voice tight. "I am the HOA president for Clearwater Bluffs." "Noted," Doyle replied. "We're currently reviewing your marina structures." "Our marina structures," Bethany repeated, as if reasserting control by dressing the words in ownership. Doyle didn't react. He checked his clipboard. "We haven't found a single permit for construction." Bethany blinked. "That's impossible." "Additionally," Doyle continued, "we are recording evidence of recent dismantling activity. That is obstruction of review and may result in upgraded penalties." Bethany's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Doyle held her gaze. "Mrs. Reed, did you or your board authorize commercial operations on this lake?" She hesitated, and that hesitation was an answer. Doyle made a note. At that moment, a resident from the ridge raised her voice. "You never told us any of this was illegal." Another shouted, "Where did all the money go, Bethany?" A third, "Did you steal from us?" The tide had shifted fully now, no longer murmurs but accusations. Bethany shook her head violently. I didn't steal anything. All the money, every dollar, went to improvements." Sarah stepped forward, flipping open her binder. "That's interesting," she said calmly, "because preliminary tracing shows rental income deposited into an account not listed on the HOA's public filings." Bethany stiffened. That's a private administrative account." "No," Sarah said, "it's not." She handed Doyle a page. He skimmed it, his brows lifted. "Mrs. Reed, are you aware this account is registered under your personal tax ID?" A gasp rolled through the residence. Bethany swayed. For a second, Remy thought she might collapse into the sand, but she steadied herself and whispered, "That account. Nathaniel set it up. For overflow funds. We'll speak with Mr. Reed," Doyle said. "But right now, you are the acting president and the responsible party for all HOA operations." Bethany's eyes grew glassy with panic. "This can't be happening," she muttered. "Oh, it's happening," a resident said coldly. "And you did this to yourself." Doyle lifted his radio. "Authority headquarters, this is Doyle. We have probable violations of Code 42B, obstruction of protected corridor access, unauthorized commercial operation, and unpermitted marina construction. Requesting legal to prepare notice of penalties." Through the crackle came the reply. "Penalties estimated?" "Over $250,000 at minimum," Doyle said. "Possibly more depending on environmental impact." Bethany let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. Remy felt no joy, not really, just closure. Truth had stepped into the light. And it was not leaving. Residents began to shift uneasily, realizing the HOA they trusted had been built on sand, and that sand had washed out beneath them. One woman murmured, "What happens to us? To our fees?" Another whispered, "Is she going to jail?" Sarah rested a hand lightly on Remy's arm. "This is the turning point." He nodded, but then Doyle walked toward him. "Mr. Cole," he said, "as the legal water rights holder, we need your statement to complete the initial report. And afterward, there may be decisions you're entitled to make regarding future operation of this lake." Remy swallowed. "Decisions?" "Yes," Doyle said. "This lake will require new management. Legal, transparent, compliant. You may choose to assume that role." The offer hit him harder than he expected. A lake he bought for peace. A lake forced into conflict. A lake now returning to him, legally and fully. He nodded quietly. "I'll give my statement." Behind them, Bethany let out a soft, broken cry. The residents turned away from her one by one, not cruelly, but with the weary disappointment of people whose trust had been shattered beyond repair. The sun climbed higher. The wind swept the lake clean. And as Remy followed Doyle toward the inspection tent, he realized the storm wasn't coming. It had already broken. And what followed now would be the rebuilding. The inspection tent sat near the shoreline, its white canvas rippling in the breeze. Inside, folding tables had been set up with neatly arranged binders, laptops open to state statute pages, and evidence bags lined up like a quiet wall of truth. The air smelled of lake water and cut lumber, scents that somehow made the entire setting feel strangely solemn. Doyle motioned for Remy to sit. "We'll take your statement now. Everything you saw. Everything documented." Remy nodded. As he began recounting events, discovering the gate, the unpermitted docks, the early morning dismantling, he watched Sarah take notes from the corner of the tent, her pen moving swiftly, decisively. She glanced up occasionally to give a small nod, reassuring him that he was doing exactly what needed to be done. Outside, investigators continued marking violations. Every few minutes, a camera clicked. A tape measure snapped. A clipboard scribbled. And with each passing sound, the weight on Remy's chest eased. When he finished, Doyle closed his folder. "Thank you, Mr. Cole. This is thorough, very thorough. And given the scope of the offenses, you should expect formal hearings within a few weeks." "Will I need to testify?" "Yes," Doyle said. "But your evidence speaks cleanly. You'll be fine." Remy stepped out of the tent, blinking against the brightening sun. The lake stretched before him in soft ripples, reflecting the ridge and sky like a sheet of moving glass. For the first time since buying the property, he felt something close to peace. But the day wasn't done. As he headed back toward the dock, he saw a sheriff SUV parked near the ridge. Sheriff Jake Mercer stood by the open door, speaking quietly to someone inside. Then Remy saw who it was. Bethany Reed. She sat stiffly on the passenger seat, hands clasped so tightly around her binder that her knuckles had gone white. The pink suit looked faded now, out of place, almost costume-like. Her expression was a mix of exhaustion, disbelief, and something deeper, something that looked like grief. Jake closed the door and walked toward Remy. "She's not under arrest," he said preemptively, "but she's being taken in for questioning. The state wants direct statements from her and the treasurer." Remy nodded slowly. "I figured." Jake removed his hat, ran a hand through his hair. "I'll be honest. I didn't expect it to go this far." "I didn't either," Remy admitted. "You didn't push this too hard, Remy," Jake said. "They built something illegal. They hid it. And when it started collapsing, they panicked and made worse choices. That's on them." Remy appreciated the clarity. Jake slid his hat back on. "Anyway, county's done here until the state finishes. Just wanted to keep you updated." "Thanks, Sheriff." Jake offered a small nod before returning to the SUV. Bethany turned her head slightly when Remy passed near the window. For a moment, he wondered if she would say something, an apology, a final threat, anything. But she looked forward again, eyes unfocused, as if seeing something far away. Jake drove off. The valley grew quiet once more. By late afternoon, the inspectors packed up their equipment. Doyle shook Remy's hand firmly. "We'll be in touch with next steps. You may want to consult with a property rights attorney regarding future plans for the marina." When the last vehicle pulled away, leaving tire tracks in the soft dirt, Remy stood alone on the access road. The gate, its welded joints now cut, hung loosely on its hinges, swaying slightly as the wind pressed against it. It no longer blocked anything. It no longer claimed authority it didn't have. It was just metal, just a gate. And it was finally open. Over the next 6 months, hearings, reviews, and paperwork unfolded like a slow but steady tide. Some things moved quickly. Bethany was charged with obstruction of a protected waterway and unauthorized commercial activity. The treasurer admitted to helping divert marina funds into a private account. Multiple board members resigned within days, and eventually, the Clearwater Bluffs HOA dissolved entirely. Residents voted overwhelmingly to disband, unwilling to continue under the cloud of scandal. The community reorganized into a voluntary association, less rigid, more transparent, guided by new leadership that valued cooperation over control. But the biggest change? The lake. The lake transformed. Broken docks were removed under state supervision. The shoreline was cleaned. Soil and water testing ensured jet ski pollution hadn't caused long-term damage. Through all of it, Remy remained hands-on, filming restoration work, learning state compliance rules, helping volunteers pull discarded tires and debris from the cove. One crisp spring morning, Doyle returned with a folder in hand. "Mr. Cole," he said, "you are hereby authorized to operate the Clearwater Marina under state oversight. Provided you maintain full transparency and safety protocols, you're free to establish public or community access as you choose." Remy took the folder, feeling its weight. "You earned this," Doyle said. "Not because you fought loudly, but because you fought correctly." When Doyle left, Remy walked to the end of the old pier. The wood was worn, but the water beneath it shimmered clean and clear. Kayakers paddled across the lake. Legal, permitted, welcome. Children splashed near a designated swim zone. A family unloaded paddles and picnic baskets from a pickup parked near the newly marked easement. No megaphones. No welded gates. No false authority. Just community. Just water. Just peace. As the sun dipped behind the ridge, painting the lake in rose gold, Remy stood there with the breeze on his face and a quiet, steady sense of rightness in his chest. He whispered softly, to the water, to himself, maybe to the fight that brought him here. The lake was never theirs to own, and justice always finds its way back to the water. When a man stands his ground with the truth on his side, even the loudest gate can't keep justice out. If you'd have fought for your lake too, drop a yes in the comments, or just type justice if you've ever tangled with an HOA. And if stories about courage, land, and doing what's right speak to you, I'd be honored to have you subscribe and ride along for the next one.